You're not their mother. That's how it started. No warning, no private conversation, no hesitation, just that sentence. Dropped into the middle of a 10-year-old's birthday party like it belonged there. Have you ever had your entire life erased in front of a room full of people? Because I have. Before we continue, please hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell for updates. My name is Marceline Vera. I'm 67 years old, and for the last 12 years, I raised 3 children who were never mine by blood, but in every other way that mattered, they were. And in one moment, their father decided none of that counted. The room was full, balloons tied to chairs, cake half cut on the table. Ilira, my Ilira, still holding the knife, frozen mid-slice. Her 10th birthday. Her smile hadn't even faded yet, not completely. Then Corvain stood up. Calm. Too calm. You never were. The words didn't echo. They landed. Heavy. Final. No one laughed. No one corrected him. No one said, "That's not true." They just watched me, waiting. What do you do in that moment? Do you argue? Cry? Beg? I didn't. I stood there, feeling every pair of eyes measuring me. 12 years of school lunches, late-night fevers, quiet reassurances, reduced to nothing more than a role I apparently imagined. "Pack your things," he said. "Leave tonight." 12 years, and I get a deadline. I glanced at the children. Sale wouldn't meet my eyes. Virel looked confused, like he was trying to solve a problem that didn't make sense. And Ilira, she looked terrified. Not of him, of losing me. And that's when something settled inside me. Not anger, not sadness. Certainty. Because here's the thing no one in that room knew. This moment, I had already prepared for it. You don't spend 12 years watching someone carefully without learning who they really are. And Corvain? He was predictable. I didn't cry, not a single tear. Instead, I reached down, slowly, deliberately, and pulled a folder from my bag. You could feel the shift. The room changed, even before I opened it. Corvain saw it, and for the first time that night, his composure cracked. "Where did you get that?" he snapped. I didn't answer. I just held it there, between us. Because suddenly, he wasn't the one in control anymore. And that was only the beginning. You think you know someone, until the moment they decide you don't belong. That's the truth no one warns you about. 12 years earlier, I met Corvain Drell in a hospital hallway that smelled like antiseptic and exhaustion. I had just retired from hospice care, 55, widowed, and, if I'm being honest, adrift. He looked worse. 3 children, no wife, no system. Just a man barely holding together a life that was slipping through his fingers. We didn't fall in love the way stories like to pretend. There was no spark, no grand moment. There was alignment. He needed stability. I needed purpose. So I stepped in. At first, it felt almost natural. I organised the chaos, packed lunches, scheduled doctor visits, learned their routines, their fears, their silences. Sale, the oldest, kept his distance. Virel tested boundaries constantly. And Ilira? She attached to me like she'd been waiting for someone to stay. They didn't call me Mum right away. But over time, they did. Quietly, gradually. Corvain never corrected them, but he never encouraged it either. That should have been my first warning. Because while I built a home, he maintained distance. He worked late, ate separately more often than not, introduced me to others by my name, not as his wife, not as anything that anchored me to him, just Marceline. Do you see it? I didn't. Not at first. I thought he was grieving, adjusting, processing loss in his own way. So I compensated. I gave more, held more, managed more. And in doing that, I became essential. To the children, but not to him. There were signs. Small ones. My name never went on the house. Just temporary, he'd say. Finances were always vague. Easier this way. And whenever I brought up anything legal, guardianship, shared ownership, long-term security, he'd shut it down. Why complicate things? But life is already complicated. That's why you prepare. 3 years ago, something shifted. He started taking calls outside, locking drawers. Once, I walked into the study and saw him reading a document, thick, official-looking. He closed it too quickly. That moment stayed with me. Because it wasn't just secrecy, it was intent. That's when I started asking myself a question I should have asked much earlier. What happens to me if he decides I don't belong here anymore? I didn't confront him. I didn't argue. I did something far more useful. I paid attention. And then I started preparing. Because whether he realized it or not, he had already begun writing me out of the story. What would happen to you if everything you built disappeared overnight? I didn't ask that question out loud. I asked it sitting across from a lawyer, a quiet office, no distractions, no emotions, just facts. And the answer? You walk away with nothing. Nothing. Not the house I maintained, not the money I contributed, not even the children I raised. Legally, I was a guest who stayed too long. Let that settle for a second. 12 years of being the one they called when they were sick, scared, struggling. And on paper, I was irrelevant. I didn't cry in that office either. I listened. Because emotions don't fix situations. Information does. So I asked better questions. What can I prove? What actually counts? What holds up in court? And that's when things shifted. Because the truth is, while I wasn't recognized officially, I was documented everywhere else. School records with my signature, medical forms listing me as primary contact, receipts, emails, messages, a pattern, a history, a role that couldn't be dismissed as easily as he might have hoped. So I started collecting, quietly, every appointment I scheduled, every expense I covered, every interaction where I was the one responsible. Not obsessively, precisely. Because I wasn't preparing for a fight. I was preparing for clarity. Then, 6 months ago, he made a mistake. A simple one. He came home with papers. Just routine, he said. Tax adjustments. He placed them in front of me like it was nothing. But I'd learned something about Corvain by then. He never read things carefully. He skimmed, assumed, signed. I didn't. I read every line, slowly, twice. And that's when I saw it, the opening. A standard agreement, editable sections, language that could be expanded without raising suspicion, if you knew how. So I didn't refuse. I didn't question him. I signed. But not before adding something. Carefully worded, legally sound. Easy to overlook if you weren't paying attention. A clause. One that changed everything. And when I handed the papers back, he did exactly what I expected. He signed them. Without reading, without asking, without realizing, he had just rewritten the future he thought he controlled. And now, standing in that living room, with everyone watching, that same document sat inside my folder. The one he just told me to pack up and leave. The one he thought made me disposable. I opened the folder slowly, deliberately, and looked directly at him. "Corvain," I said calmly, "I think you should read page 4 out loud." Because the moment he did, everything in that room was about to change. "Read it." That's all I said. Not louder than before, not sharper, just certain. And somehow, that made everyone in the room lean in. Corvain didn't move at first. Have you ever seen someone realize, too late, that they've lost control of a situation they thought they owned? That's what his face looked like. Slowly, he took the folder from my hands. His fingers weren't steady anymore. Subtle, but noticeable if you knew where to look. I did. He flipped it open. Page 1. Nothing. Page 2. Standard. Page 3. Still safe. Then page 4. And that's where it stopped. His eyes didn't move the way they had before. They locked. Froze. Like his mind needed a second to catch up with what it was seeing. I watched the exact moment it clicked. The colour drained from his face, not dramatically, not all at once, but enough that the room felt colder. "This isn't," he started, but he didn't finish. Because it was. Every word, every line, exactly where it should be. I tilted my head slightly. "Go on," I said. Out loud. You could hear people shifting now. Chairs creaking, someone whispering behind me. He swallowed, and then, reluctantly, he read. "In the event of marital separation." That phrase alone changed the air. "Shared property allocation shall grant 50% ownership of the primary residence to Marceline Veyra." A gasp. Quiet, but sharp. He kept going. He had to. "Full reimbursement of documented financial contributions." Now people were looking at him differently. Not confused anymore. Aware. And then the final line. "Temporary custodial authority of the minor child may be granted based on established caregiving history." Silence. Heavy. Absolute. I didn't need to say anything. The document spoke for me. Sale was the first to break. "You were just going to throw her out?" he asked, his voice tighter than I'd ever heard it. Pharrell stepped back slightly, like the space between them suddenly mattered. And Alira, she moved closer to me. Small hand gripping mine, not questioning, choosing. Corvain looked up at me then, really looked. Not as something temporary, not as something replaceable, but as a problem he couldn't undo. "You tricked me," he said. I shook my head once, calm. "No," I replied. I paid attention. And that was the difference. The room had already shifted, socially, emotionally, but more importantly, legally. He wasn't the one giving orders anymore, so I closed the folder gently and met his eyes one last time. I'll pack my things, I said. A pause. After we decide what happens to the house. Because now, leaving wasn't the end of my story. It was the part where his control ended. Some endings don't explode. They settle. That night didn't end with shouting. It ended with silence. Heavy, unavoidable, final. Within 3 days, Corvain had a lawyer. Within 5, I had confirmation. The document held. Every line, every clause, legally binding, fully enforceable. No technicality to hide behind, no wording vague enough to challenge. The addition I made, clear, structured, witnessed and signed, was now the foundation of everything that followed. And what actually happened? Simple. The house was no longer his alone. It was split. 50% mine. Every financial contribution I had documented over 12 years, reviewed, verified, reimbursed in structured payments. And the clause that mattered most, Illyra. The court didn't look at biology. They looked at history, school records, medical forms, witness statements. A pattern of care that couldn't be ignored. So temporary custodial authority? Granted to me. Not permanently, not yet, but enough to make one thing very clear. I wasn't invisible anymore, and neither was what I had done. Now let me ask you something. What do you think hurts more? Losing money or losing control? Because Corvain lost both. He tried to negotiate at first, quietly, privately, as if this could still be contained. But it couldn't. Too many people had seen. At that party, something else had been signed, just not on paper. Witness, perception, judgment. Sale stopped speaking to him entirely for a while. Not out of rebellion, but clarity. Virel stayed quieter, distant, observing. And Illyra, she didn't hesitate. "I'm staying with Mama," she said. No confusion, no pressure, just truth. Months passed. The house changed, but not physically. Same walls, same rooms. Different weight. Quieter. Cleaner, somehow. Corvain sold his portion eventually. Financial strain forced it. Control didn't return to him after that. It simply dissolved. And me? For the first time in years, I allowed myself to feel something I hadn't fully touched before. Not victory, not revenge. Recognition. That what I gave existed. That it mattered. That it couldn't be erased just because someone decided it was inconvenient. One evening, I sat at the kitchen table. Illyra across from me, focused on her homework, humming softly like she always did when she felt safe. I opened the folder again. That same folder. Ran my fingers along the edge of page 4, then closed it, gently. Placed it back where it belonged. Not as a weapon, not anymore. As proof. Because in the end, I didn't just stay. I was acknowledged. And this time, no one in that room would ever question why.